Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. This week, the topic is Blessed Be the Fruit. And if you are a Handmaid's Tale fan, then you will certainly recognize that phrase if you don't recognize it for other reasons. And it was the title of my essay. And I was talking about Al-Anon. I started going to meetings when I was 17. Al-Anon is part of Alcoholics Anonymous, but Al-Anon specifically is for family members of alcoholics, because usually people that grow up with a family member who is struggling with addiction are going to have some things in common. And in my particular situation, my mother was an alcoholic, and I've written about that and talked about it a lot. And she was many things. My mother was really a complicated person, but she was a good person. She had a good heart. She was a good friend to people. Anytime anyone was in trouble, there was always a couch for them at our house. When I moved out later, there were always people, friends of hers, if they needed a place to stay, they would be in my old room. She was very generous in that way and loyal, but she also had a volatile temper. She was a force. You would not miss it if she walked into a room. She was beautiful and smart and funny, but, she could be intimidating, and there's just a lot of things. You can't ever paint anyone with one brush. I think my mother had a lot of trauma in her life. She lost her dad when she was 13 and her mom when she was 28. Her mom was her best friend, and I was 4 years old at the time. And my dad left the week after her mother died, which was not a coincidence. They had been kind of keeping up appearances for a year. As my grandmother was dying of cancer, my mother did not want her to be worried about the state of the marriage or what might happen later. So when I was about 7, my mom started drinking, and maybe it had, there might have been some sign of that earlier, but I don't recall that. I was so young, but certainly when I was around 7, it became a real issue, and I would help her stand up sometimes if she couldn't, get up out of a chair, or she couldn't walk in a straight line. And at 7, you don't understand that it's the alcohol that's done that. You're not sure what is creating this change in behavior, but this is just what you're growing up with. And sometimes she would become enraged with me, and I would be dealing with that confusion and pain of not understanding what I had done wrong or what was creating that rage in her. So I understood as I got older that this was a thing, and it was a frequent, many times a week thing with my mom, but no one in her inner circle would validate those feelings. And so as I got older and I started to say, I think my mom is not okay, she needs some help, this doesn't seem right to me that she's drinking so much and so often. And the response was always, your perception is wrong, your mom is fine, she's a social drinker, you're sensitive, you're dramatic, everything is okay. But she would become so enraged so frequently that I knew that couldn't be right. And I had the experience, even, as young as 7, of getting my mom home in a cab and having to pay the cab driver because she couldn't do simple math in that state. She'd be so incapacitated. And I remember the way, cab drivers would look at me with concern and sympathy. And sometimes I recall, cab drivers getting out of the cab and helping me help her. So I knew this was probably beyond the norm and that other people's moms might not be having these kinds of issues. It wasn't until I got to be maybe like 12 or 13 that I understood the connection with the alcohol. And there were other experiences. She got very upset with me once in a restaurant because I did not want to eat this chicken. I understood at a certain age that the chicken on my plate was the chicken that used to be on the farm. And I had missed that memo along the way because, when you're a kid and a burger shows up on your plate, you don't necessarily realize it's coming from a cow. The day that I did understand that was the day that I didn't want to eat animals anymore. I was devastated because I really loved animals as a kid. And my mother was furious about that. It just wasn't going to be an acceptable thing. And so it was actually her restaurant, and she and my stepdad opened a restaurant, and she kind of shoved a piece of chicken in my mouth, and I went running through the dining room and down the stairs and into the bathroom to spit it out. I was running through the dining room with like a piece of chicken hanging out of my mouth, and she was enraged and chased me down the stairs and went into the bathroom and grabbed me by the wrist and was spanking me, hitting me, and yelling at me. And this older woman's kind of grandmotherly type woman walked into the bathroom and instantly said, stop touching that child. I'm going to report you. And my mother let go of me, went into the stall, shut the door, and I'd already been crying, of course, but I started to beg this woman not to report my mother. And so I knew along the way, this is beyond the norm, like something's not right here. And I knew the way that you know things, even if you can't really you don't have the words for them or you can't fully understand. I knew it didn't feel right that she would sort of come after me and yell at me and physically kind of threaten me and intimidate me. Like I knew that couldn't be right. And that her personality would just suddenly change. But I didn't fully understand why until I got old enough to understand why. And so that kind of thing went on for years. And then as I got older and I realized it's alcohol, like that's what's going on here. That's when her personality changes. Because no one around me was validating that, I did question myself. I really wasn't sure. So when you are growing up in an environment like that, and people who have grown up in alcoholic households will relate to this, but there are sometimes it's mental illness or, there are things happening in the household that don't feel right, but everyone's kind of telling you everything's fine or acting like everything's fine. You come out of that experience and you don't trust yourself. You don't trust your ability to discern reality clearly. So when you then head out into the world yourself, you don't have that kind of trust that you are interpreting things properly. It makes you second guess yourself. It creates a lot of self-doubt. And for me, because I was the target of my mother's rage so much of the time, it also created this feeling inside of me that something must be wrong with me. I was enraging her so often and no one else, that it must be me. There must be something like broken in me or wrong with me or unlovable at my core if my own mother couldn't love me. So those were sort of the seeds there. When I got to be 17, I didn't share this very much. I shared it with her inner circle, but my mother was very concerned with how things looked. As long as everything looked perfect on the outside, that would do. And if you, for example, came over to our house and were sitting on the couch having a drink or whatever and went to the bathroom, my mother would come and fluff that pillow and fluff the couch while you were gone. We had, incredible Christmas card pictures every year where everything looked perfect. But inside things were not so perfect. And so I understood, you don't air your dirty laundry. I did not talk to many people at all about what was going on because I also felt this sense of not wanting to betray her. I loved her and I desperately wanted her love and her approval. And so I would not confide in people about what was happening because I didn't want to hurt her. And so this went on for a very long time. And then I got to be, older and went out into the world and started my own, just trying to start that path of, creating that autonomy and trying to figure things out. And at a certain point, I did talk to a friend of mine who I think had probably confided in me first about his own struggles with alcoholism. And he said, I think you might really benefit from Al-Anon meetings, and told me that there was this weekly meeting that happened at a church in the neighborhood. And that church happened to be down the block from where my mother worked at the time. And it was also like a couple blocks away from the house where I grew up, the building where I grew up. And I went and I got like a flyer with the schedule, which I did not take with me. I just saw when these meetings were, and I decided I would go. And I was definitely not totally sure that I was entitled to be there. I was still doubting what I knew, even though I really did know in my heart my mom was an alcoholic. And becoming that enraged, having your personality change that much, becoming that kind of unhinged and physical, and even just the verbal, I just knew like this cannot be right. And not being able to walk in a straight line or stand up, or you're slurring, like not being in control of the things that you're saying and doing. I knew, but I still doubted myself because of what I had been told over and over and over again, that it wasn't true, and she was a social drinker, and and so I went to this meeting, but I snuck to the meeting. I would scan the environment to make sure no one was around who might see me heading down to the church basement, down the steps, because I knew if my mother saw me or any of her friends saw me, if it got back to her that I had gone to an Al-Anon meeting or was going to, she would have lost it. Like, it would not have been okay, because she would have, been enraged that I was making it, creating a scenario where someone might think she was an alcoholic. That just would not have been acceptable. So I would go down the street looking around to make sure no one I knew was watching or nearby. And when I think about that now, it makes me so sad to think of my 17-year-old self being that afraid of getting caught looking for help. It was as if I was like committing a crime or something, because I was hoping to get some support. But that's what happened. And the first meeting I went to, any doubt I had about whether I belonged there or whether I was entitled to that kind of support or help, it vanished, because within like 10 minutes of that first meeting, someone said, just in a very offhanded way, that's why you don't go to the hardware store looking for apples. And the whole room laughed, and it was like one of those explosions in my brain, like, whoa, wait a minute. Don't go to the hardware store for apples. Like, that's what I've been doing my whole life. Because at a certain point, I had started trying to earn my mother's love, and whatever that meant, whatever that looked like, whatever it took. So it was like getting straight A's, starving myself, going to ballet every day after school, skipping my senior year of high school and going to Columbia University. Like, I would I worked overtime trying to earn her love, her approval. And it just, no matter what I did, it was never enough. That was the experience I was having. And I also realized that I was repeating that pattern in my own personal life, that I was starting to, I was forging that path between like your teenage years and moving into adulthood. I realized I am drawn toward people who are mercurial, and there's something going on there where I'm attracted to people who are gonna hurt me, and I better figure that out. And what I mean by that is going to the hardware store for apples, trying to get blood from a stone, or get an apology from a narcissist, or try to get affection from someone who doesn't like physical touch, it's not their love language, or trying to have a difficult, painful conversation with someone who doesn't like that kind of interaction and doesn't want to look at their own behavior. And that, for example, with my mom, that's something she would never ever do. As I got older, I would try from time to time to bargain with her and say, okay, look, I want to spend time with you, but if you're going to be drinking, I can't be around that. And she would say, okay, I won't drink. And then we'd go meet for lunch, and she'd order a glass of Chardonnay, and I'd leave. You can't bargain with someone who is in the grip of addiction. There is no bargaining. And that is really it's theirs to solve, but it's so painful when you love people who are struggling in that way. And it does feel like it's some reflection on you, but it's really a reflection of just they're owned by the addiction. And there isn't a lot of room for other relationships. It's the main primary relationship is going to be between the person who's struggling with addiction and whatever the substance is. So it was rough for a long time, but I did realize quickly it was like I had found the room full of people from my planet. People were raising their hands and saying things, and it was just it's like that thing where you're like, oh, wow, that's me. I do that all the time, that caretaking thing, that sort of being on high alert and scanning the environment all the time to figure out if I'm safe or I'm not safe, or what I need to do to be safe. That tendency to really focus on the other person's needs, wants, and not even have my own on my radar, all of these things, and a lack of boundaries, just not knowing when to say, no, that's not okay for me, or I feel uncomfortable, not even having the language for that, because you don't develop it in that kind of family system. You don't develop the muscle, the language for, here's how I feel right now, or here's what I want, or here's what's scaring me, or here's what I need, or that's just not part of it. And in my experience, and in both houses, because my parents got divorced when I was 4, at my dad's house, he had a flash temper, and he made me his keeper. He would talk to me about his challenges as a grown man with fidelity. And that's a whole other, I could be here for 12 hours talking about that. But the bottom line is that in both households, my job was to caretake, to make sure my parents were okay, and to be watching to see if there were any signs that things might not be okay, so that I could try to, circumvent, or, whatever might work, placate, fawn, all the things, which are different forms of fight or flight. It's sometimes you freeze, sometimes you fawn, sometimes you run, you go and you hide, you try to make yourself invisible, so it's all of that stuff. And so when I started going to these meetings, it was it was a revelation, and incredibly helpful. And I went on and off for about 3 years, and I didn't ever go, it was not a strict schedule that I kept. There might be weeks or months where I didn't go at all. But for the course of about 3 years, I would go pretty regularly. I just did not want the fact that my mother was an alcoholic. I didn't want that to define me. I'd already been defined so much by that. I didn't want to keep feeding that narrative, even though it was true and real, like a ton of my energy, because that's not all that I am either. Just like my mother wasn't just an alcoholic, I'm not just the child of an alcoholic, and I didn't want to frame my entire life around that idea. That's me, that's how I felt. But I'd go back every so often for sort of like a tune-up, just to remind myself about boundaries and about speaking up if something didn't feel right in the moment as best I could, or working on developing that muscle so that I could open my mouth and say something. What happens sometimes is that even though you can know a thing, like I understood instantly why you don't go to the hardware store for apples, just because you know something doesn't mean that your kind of motherboard is going to get the download. It could still happen. Like you understand, oh, okay, I have like an anxious attachment style, which, by the way, like I did, as I was, when I first kind of went out into the world, I certainly had an anxious attachment style. I don't anymore. Like these things are not set in stone. You can really shift a lot of those tendencies if you work on healing and really putting a high value on your own well-being. But that takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes trying to figure out what are the tools I need that are going to help me the most in that endeavor. This is something I've been working on for over 30 years. So it's, not new to me. But when I first kind of went out into the world, certainly I had an anxious attachment style. It's not surprising. And if you grew up with a lot of uncertainty and not knowing, maybe like sometimes you got a loving response from your primary caregivers, and sometimes you were terrified by them or abandoned by them, or, it was inconsistent. You didn't know from day to day. Then you might also have experienced times in your life or the early part of your adult life where you had an anxious attachment style. And the hardest pairing is the anxiously attached person with the avoidant. And of people who have like an avoidant attachment style, intimacy scares them. And that can come from like feeling overwhelmed and smothered by intimacy. So there's all kinds of things, and attachment styles are very interesting, but again, they're not set in stone. So I never want people to feel like, oh, I've identified my attachment style and like this is horrible. It's like, it's okay. It's just it's kind of like if you were at like a mall and you looked at a map and you were like, okay, you are here. This is like just where you are right now. It doesn't mean that's where you're always going to be or where you have to be. You're not stuck. You're a human being. And the good news is we really can heal, but sometimes you have to kind of like try different things and focus your attention and figure out what is going to help you the most. There's no formula. I can certainly share the things that have helped me, and I will, and I do, but we're not robots, different people need different things. So in any case, these Al-Anon meetings were really helpful for me at a time in my life that was certainly like coming out of those formative years and not quite into my full adulthood yet. So it was a really good timing for me. But that feeling of not wanting to be caught getting help is sad. And this idea, and the reason that I named the essay Blessed Be the Fruit, this idea of like not going to the hardware store for apples, was something that I had to learn the hard way. Even though I understood the concept, I still had to play it out, a number of times before I really understood, like, if I keep doing this, there's only so much your heart can take. If you keep engaging with people who can only let you down, there's only so much of that you can take before you're either like you become more hardened or you become really incredibly depressed, or we're human beings, and so there's only so much that your heart can take. And so I, over time, began to trust myself and realize absolutely my mom's an alcoholic. Like, this is not something that I was confused about as I was growing. And what, I learned about enablers, and that is a very common thing when you have someone who's dealing with addiction, that they surround themselves with people who are not going to force the conversation or force change, and you can't force it anyway, but they're not going to kind of throw up those roadblocks. They're going to just let you keep doing what you're doing because they're dealing with their own trauma probably, or, this is what they're used to. Or they're so uncomfortable with confrontation. It's tough. And so it's a common pairing. You have somebody dealing with addiction and very frequently someone enabling. And then there's a whole bunch of other things. Like I was talking about boundaries and this idea that if you grow up trying to manage or help or care for someone who's dealing with addiction, you may become an enabler, instead of saying, this is not okay and I can't take this on. I can't be responsible for your happiness or your well-being or your ability to pay for a cab ride or, control the amount you're drinking. Like, I can't take that on for you. I can't fix that for you. That's not part of the equation, because especially if you're dealing with someone like my mom who will not even admit there's a problem. If someone can't do that, that's step one in trying to fix something, move in a different direction, get some help. But if you're I don't need any help because there's nothing wrong, it's really hard. And that is what I was dealing with for a long time. And even after I left the house, this is what was the hardest part of my relationship with her. She would drink. She would behave in incredibly hurtful, disappointing ways and then refuse to acknowledge, apologize. There just wasn't any, those conversations were not going to happen. And I ended up doing a lot of, accepting apologies she never offered, which is a thing, right? And also figuring out boundaries. How can I have her in my life because I love her so much, but also keep myself safe because this is devastating. What do I need to do, and how can I do that? And so that's a lot of what I was writing about this week, but in the context of sometimes, even though you understand something, you might still find yourself trying to engage with someone, get something from someone that they have shown you time and again they're not either willing or able to offer. That you may go back to the well and try one more time and think maybe this time it'll be different. And there are people, it's one of the reasons Al-Anon meetings are so helpful, is that's a tendency, is to hope this time will be the time. I'll write the perfect email. And this happens with people who are dealing with personality disorders as well. And you may have people like this in your life. I was talking about, there are people who cannot say I'm sorry. They can't get the words I'm sorry out of their mouths. They can't do it. Or they're going to lie to your face. They'd rather lie to you than be accountable for hurtful behavior. Or you might be dealing with people who have shown you historically they're gonna let you down, but you kind of keep going back. And I did that in my adult relationships for a while, and it was really painful. I kind of was playing out the same dynamic I'd had growing up with my mom of just not being able to, what do I need to do to earn the love? And in my case, the thing that would get me often was the bait and switch, where somebody would seem so they'd come chasing and, you're amazing, you're wonderful, you're this, you're that. And I would think oh, wow, this person is really into me. This feels so good. And then as soon as they would feel like they had me, then it would switch, right? It would turn into, maybe you shouldn't eat that pie, or I had a relationship with a much older man when I was 17 for 3, and he was absolutely horrible to me, and kind of if you had put my parents in a blender, their personalities, their tendencies, if you had just put them in a blender and popped out a man, this was the man. And my parents had 20 years between them, so it was no original thing I was doing. But he was just awful. I mean, he chased. And once he had me, it was just like horrible to me. Maybe you don't need to be eating that pie. Like, if we're still together when you're 25, I'll get you a boob job. And like, just stuff where and absolutely was cheating on me. Same. My dad was a really, just a wild womanizer and serial. I mean, he was unfaithful to everyone he was ever with. And I just repeated that. And he was also emotionally unavailable, like my mom. Like, I could never earn it. It was never enough. I could never do enough to get the love, to get the approval, to get the affection. Like, I just couldn't do it. And it's so painful when you're in that kind of relationship, especially if you're just repeating old trauma, you're repeating this old dynamic. And we do it. This is a thing that we do. It's the repetition compulsion. Even like Einstein, it's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing again and again, expecting a different outcome. Carl Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So that's like, a lot of us do that. We don't realize we're doing it, of course, but we are attracted to people where this dynamic is going to be really familiar, so it feels like home, so we get totally sucked in, and we're trying to like get that happy ending, thinking if I can get it now, it'll make that little kid in me who was so deeply wounded feel better. And it never works, because you're picking people who can't give you the thing that you want. All they're going to do is make your self-doubt, self-loathing, worse. And so I did that, as I was trying to figure all these things out, until I realized that this is not the way. And again, I mean, I've written about this a lot. For me, writing has always been a method of like understanding myself, the world, other people. I've always been fascinated by what drives people, what's motivating them, what's scaring them, what's getting in their way. Like, that's just always been a fascination for me, I think, because I came out of this kind of environment. And so psychology's always been fascinating. And, and so that, and therapy is really trying to understand what is happening here? Why do I keep doing this? And how can I stop doing this? And for me personally, therapy was amazing. In terms of identifying like my triggers and why I was doing the things I was doing. But that's kind of where I got stuck for me. It's just, we all have our own, might be different for different people, but that's what happened for me, where I could have told you, I could have written a dissertation about like why I was doing what I was doing, but I couldn't overcome it. And then like I needed something somatic. For me, it was yoga, like getting on my mat and really trying to work on trusting myself. Like, okay, I think I'm in a 90-degree bend. Let me put my hands on my body and see if I'm in a 90-degree bend, or learning how to focus, just use these focal points so that if my mind was trying to take me on a ride into the past or the future, I had tools to say, no, I don't want to do that. That's not going to be productive right now. Let me just stay in this moment and focus on this, being able to choose one thought over another. Working through your fear, if there are poses that scare you, like this, again, I'm just using my experience, but like I wasn't a kid who did gymnastics. I didn't dive into a pool head first. I had a lot of, I think, fear, because so much of my childhood was spent trying to avoid danger. And so the idea of inversions was scary. Well, then you work through your fear, right? You figure out, okay, how can I not let this stop me in my tracks? And so for me, those were, arm balances, inversions, those were great tools for me to feel that fear and do it anyway, but do it smart, do it so you don't break your neck. Like, work with people who know what they're doing, and trust yourself, right? And keep breathing and don't give up, right? Fall down 7 times, get up 8, that kind of thing. So those are the things that really helped me move through a lot of this and be able to overcome, so I don't want to be somebody who, just because everyone left when I was 4. I didn't want to be the kind of person who had abandonment issues my whole life or was anxiously attached my whole life. Like, that's a misery. Who wants to do that, you know? So there are ways to move through this stuff, and you just have to kind of explore and figure out what's going to work for you. But no matter how much work you do, you may find that there are times where you're still going to the hardware store for apples. And I did some of that over the last week in a way. And I've been talking about this too. I have had some email interactions. I'm doing a fundraiser, and if you do read the essays, then you would have received the information about that. And I write these, my personal essays every week. And I had an email exchange from a few different women in the last week who were upset for different reasons. One of them was really upset that I was doing this fundraiser and that I had the gall to announce it. But, one of the things about a fundraiser is if you don't announce it, then no one comes and no one knows and you don't raise any money. So you kind of have to announce it. But the way that she expressed herself, she's very, very upset. And I had a lot of kind of shouty all caps emails, not from a lot of people, just from a few. A lot of people have been amazing and wonderful, and the comments under these essays are, just the gold in my life. They're so beautiful, and yeah. But you're not not everyone is. We don't all agree on everything. This is part of reality and part of why life is interesting. We don't all agree on everything. We're all swimming in our own waters as we're growing and learning. And for me, a lot of the waters I was swimming and growing in as a kid and as I was becoming a teenager and a young adult, they were, the water it was very much tainted by my mother's alcoholism and other messaging too about and this is all of us, anyone who's a girl or a woman growing up in this culture. I'm in the United States. You're getting messages all the time about your worth and your value, and it's a patriarchy. That's how we're growing. And so those messages that you're getting are about your worth and your value. It's the male gaze, and this whole idea of you're seeing beauty magazines and you're seeing commercials, and there's all this stuff being targeted toward girls and women, and makeup and hair and diets and this and that. It's it's hard for all of us, I think, in this culture across all gender lines. It's very hard for us because we're constantly getting messages about how we're not measuring up because it's capitalism. And how do you get people to buy things unless they feel like they're not enough as they are, right? You have to keep kind of twisting that knife and telling people oh, well, if you you don't smell right, or you don't look right, or but there's no doubt that women and girls, there's just so much conversation about your looks, how you look, and that's your value. And it's really, and there's so much more than that. There's the whole, what was she wearing? There's all these different ways that we are. It's insidious. It's, like I said, it's in the water, where we are being told that our value is not as much as boys and men. And it comes across in all different ways, right? Even now, women are paid 69 cents on the dollar doing the same job a man is doing. Why? This doesn't make any sense, right? But there's only one way to receive that message. So it's a constant. And then you have all other ways that those messages are coming through, things that you're seeing in your family of origin, but then you go to school, then you're out, in the world, you're seeing billboards, you're going to films. It's just, you're inundated with this messaging, and it is not easy. It's not easy. And hopefully for all of us at a certain point, we come out of our childhoods and our teenage years and our young adult years. We get out in the world and we start to question some of the things we've been taught. So for me, for example, I started to question like this whole idea, is my role to be helpful and nurturing and kind and loving and always on high alert to make sure everyone is okay? Is that really what my job is here and what my value is? Am I never allowed to be angry or beyond? Like, can I never be enraged or sad, like anything? And that is what I learned. Like, that was not tolerated in either household. I wasn't allowed to be angry or sad. I was allowed to be helpful. I could be happy. I could be silly as long as it wasn't like too silly or getting in anyone's way. I could be funny, but I couldn't be angry and I couldn't be sad. That stuff was shut down right away. And really my job was to help, to make sure, is my mom okay? And if she's not okay, what can I do? And is there any way I can like head this off at the pass? Is my dad okay? Does he need my help? If he's not okay, like how can I help? I had to start asking myself, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And how about some of these other things I've been taught, that you don't air your dirty laundry and that it's all about how things look. And as long as things are looking good, then everything's fine. Like, you start to really hold these things up to the light and figure out what you think. And then whatever you've been taught about how other people live or how other people love or how other people pray or don't pray, like whatever you've been taught in your family of origin, in your school, in your environment, in the town where you live, like those are all things that hopefully we come out of our experiences, we get out into the big wide world and we use critical thinking and our own personal experiences and maybe unlearn some things, right? And relearn some other things. We question. That's the sign of someone who is healthy and trying to become autonomous and figure out their own perspective, their own values, their own core beliefs, their own ways of interpreting the information that they're receiving. And, there are so many people who grew up in households where they were told all kinds of things like, love is between a man and a woman. I have so many friends who grew up with that kind of messaging who are gay. And can you imagine like you're growing up and you're being taught that this thing that you are feeling is sinful? That is so painful to feel like if I told my family how I'm feeling, they wouldn't love me anymore. I mean, that's just heartbreaking. And so hopefully whatever the messaging might have been, wherever we are, it's like hopefully at a certain point you're going to like decide for yourself what you think about things. And certainly for me, after 30 plus years of yoga and meditation and writing and like all the things that have helped me so much in my own life, of course I have a perspective on things, of course I do. And when I'm teaching or I'm writing or I'm doing I'm going to share what I think. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with me. You don't have to listen. You don't have to read. You don't have to, you don't have to take my class. Like nothing is demanded of you. But if you're going to, of course I'm going to be transparent about how I feel, because I think that's part of the work, is to say, this is what I'm feeling. I'm looking at the world around me and this is what I'm making of what I'm seeing. And right now, and what I've been feeling for a long time, is just like heartbroken. I feel heartbroken. Like this is not the world that I want for any of us. Not for, my children, not for your children if you have children, not for you if you don't. Like, this is just not it. This is so far below what I believe it could be and what it ought to be. And, and so I'm doing a fundraiser, and this woman sent me a very angry email. I've been in business for 9 years and I would never share my beliefs with and it's like, okay, I've been in business since 2009. And what my business is sharing my feelings. That's my business. It's teaching people the tools that have worked for me. It's, writing about the things that are really meaningful to me. That's what I do. And so, anyway, she's very shouty, and and also really threatening. You should trust me. You're gonna regret this. It's like, oh, listen, honey, please. Like, you do your business the way you want to, and I'll do mine the way I want to. It would never occur to me to send someone an email and tell them how they should do things. It's like, I've got enough to manage just looking at my own path and figuring out what makes sense to me. I'm not going to start telling other people how to live or how to run things or what they should or shouldn't do. That is not it. But I wrote back, and I was I was calm, and I just said what I just said to you. And, some people want to have a conversation and some people don't, and that's fine. I also received other emails, and again, they were overwhelmingly beautiful, positive, wonderful emails. So I just want to make that clear. There's just a few outliers who, were extremely outraged. And so one of these people, and I want to talk about something that I've been talking about all week, because I think it's really important to say this, and I think it's really important that everyone understands this. But it's not, this is not comfortable, and I just want to give you a heads up just so you understand. I'm about to launch into like a subtopic here, that one of the things that's happening, and I've been writing about these restrictive abortion bans that have happened since we lost Roe v. Wade, which was the law of the land since 1973. And 62% of Americans across party lines were very happy with Roe. Nobody wanted Roe overturned. Well, 62% of people did not want Roe overturned, the majority of Americans. So when we lost Roe, it triggered all of these states to create their own measures, their own, laws about abortion and what was going to happen. And as you definitely know if you read my essays and if you've been listening to the podcast, we have, 22 states and counting with restrictive abortion bans that were not voted on. These were just, we lost Roe, and that triggered legislators in all of these different states to put into writing what their laws were going to be. And so no one got to vote on that, but that is what has happened. And here's the thing that became really clear to me during this email exchange that I had, not with woman one, with woman two. Woman two said to me at a certain point in this exchange, in all caps, no one is saying miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies are the same as abortions. No one. 12 exclamation points. Okay. So I then said, I don't know if you know this, and so if you do, forgive me, but I want to make sure that you do understand. If I am pregnant and very happy to be pregnant, want to have a baby, and yet something happens, I have an emergency, and I start to have a miscarriage or some other fatal abnormality or ectopic pregnancy, or what, something happens where I am suddenly hemorrhaging, I'm going to go to the ER. Like we all would. If we were bleeding out, we would go to the ER, right? Well, in the States with restrictive abortion bans, if you are pregnant and you start having a miscarriage and you go to the ER because you're hemorrhaging, you're going to be in some trouble. And here is why. In case you don't know this, the procedure that you need, at least one of them, is going to be a D&C or a D&E. So that's dilation and or dilation and curettage, or dilation and evacuation. Depending on if you're in the first trimester, it's going to be a D&C, and if you're beyond the first trimester, it's going to be a D&E. That is an abortion. That's the same. Those are the same. Those procedures, a D&C or a D&E, those are the same procedures you need when you get an abortion. So the abortion bans have an impact on those people coming to the hospital who are having a miscarriage or other pregnancy-related emergency, heartbreaking, devastating, life-threatening, pregnancy-related emergency. They're going to the ER to get life-saving care, and they are being told, you're going to have to go back home and come back when you're really like so much, your life is so clearly at risk. No one could interpret it any other way, or you're going to have to go wait in the parking lot, because the bans, it doesn't matter why you're going. If you need a D&C or a D&E, these abortion bans are going to impact you. And that is why people like Kate Cox, and not just Kate Cox, but I'm using that as an example, in Texas, right? There was a fatal abnormality, and she needed this abortion to save her own life and also her fertility, her future fertility. She has 2 kids already, and she desperately wanted another child. And because of these bans, it was, nope, you're not, we can't, say clearly enough that your life is at risk yet. So denied. And then she managed, you got to sue. So this is what I was starting to say before. No one got to vote on this, right? So if you want to challenge one of these measures that's now on the books in any of these states with the restrictive bans, there are only really 2 ways you can do it. One is to sue the state for the life-saving, fertility-saving care that you need. You can sue. Now, if you are in a life-threatening situation, you probably don't have time to sue. Plus, it's expensive. So if you're bleeding out, you're not calling an attorney. You're going to the ER to get help, medical intervention. Or you can get it on the ballot. Not in every state. Not every state allows you to do that. But in some states, if you get enough signatures, you can get a measure on the ballot, and then in the next election, you can vote. But the next election might not be for 2 years. And not every state allows you to do that. And guess who makes it hard to get a measure on the ballot? The same legislators who wrote the measure. So it's not pretty. And the reason that I'm emphasizing that is because when I then explained to her about the D&C and the D&E, and a lot of people really don't know that. And I know that now because I've been talking about it all week. And a tremendous number of people do not understand these procedures. It's not the only use of a D&C or D&E is an abortion, right? Like I just said, it might be to help someone who is hemorrhaging from a miscarriage. There are other reasons that somebody might need a D&C or a D&E, but they fall under the abortion ban. So that's, I think, an essential thing to know if you didn't know, because otherwise you won't understand what impact it's having. Whatever your feelings are about abortion, you need to understand they're having an impact on people who are trying to have babies, or whose lives are at risk now because they wanted to have a baby and something dreadful is happening. Those people are now endangered as well. So I think it's really important for everyone to know that. So I said that to her. And then she came back and said, you know what? Women in these states, they voted for these bans. And so you people in New York or California, you should just keep your opinions to yourself because, you do what you want in your states, but in these states, and I said, okay, they didn't vote. That's not how it worked. So a big part of what's happening, I think, out there is that people are confused about what I was explaining about a D&C and a D&E, but also how our government works. That's part of what's going on too. I don't know what has happened to like civics lessons. I found that stuff fascinating. I did a constitutional law class when I was in high school, and I loved it. And it's such important information for people to grasp, how our government works, how a bill becomes a law. Remember, we used to have the dancing song about that. This is stuff we all need to understand, because if you're in a democracy but you don't know how it works, you're not going to be engaging with it, and it's not going to work. And that's what we have happening here. So no one voted on this, just to make that really clear as well. But here's tying it back into like the topic of my essay, which is don't go to the hardware store for apples. There are people, like, no matter what you do or how much you explain, and then I've really tried like all week just to be certainly like polite, respectful, calm, and, informative. And I've been so thankful because a few doctors have backed me up, which is just, it's helpful when you're like putting these things out into the world on social media or wherever you are. It's so lovely when a doctor says, yes, that's true, because people get triggered. People are everyone's like super reactive right now. It's a heated environment. I get it. But yeah, I'm really careful. I don't just write things or say things. Like if I'm going to say something or write something, believe me when I tell you, like I'm going to spend a lot of time making sure, especially if it's something like this, that I have quadruple checked my facts, and probably more than you think. Like I actually called my own doctor to make sure that my understanding was accurate. So it's like, it's good. It's, I think, important at the very least. My feeling is, let's make sure everyone knows this, and then they can do what they will with the information. But let's not have there be all this confusion where people are thinking, well, why, okay. Also, let me just say this quickly, because this also came up over email. No one is having an abortion of a healthy baby in the 8th or 9th month or after birth, which is like, I don't even know. I can't even believe those words are coming out of my mouth, because it's so hard for me to believe that anyone could think that anyone is aborting a baby after birth. Like that's not a thing anywhere. That is not a thing. And no one is aborting a baby, a healthy baby, in the 8th or 9th month. That is not a thing, okay? Dreadful, horrible, heartbreaking, devastating things happen in utero sometimes. There's stillbirth, there's all kinds of things that people go through that are so devastating. And I want to wrap this up, but I just want to share with you, for me personally, like I hesitate to talk about this because if someone pregnant is listening, I don't want them to be worried, but with my first, there's a number of things I want to say. One of them is I got pregnant with my first after a year of trying all the natural ways to conceive, and then all the natural sort of interventions like acupuncture, boiling the tea, peeing on sticks, like looking at I did it all. I even had like a Maori healer who was 7'4" massage my uterus with his elbow from the outside, because he said I had so much, muscle from all the yoga that I had to like break up. There was like scar tissue. It was, whatever. I don't know. I did every crazy thing. And then I ended up going to a fertility doctor and doing a round of Clomid and IUI. And then my son, then I was pregnant. And then when I went through, so that year plus of infertility and struggling with fertility was incredibly painful. Emotionally, just like so devastating. And then when I went through childbirth, we just so happened to have a very difficult time. And what I will say to you is I would not be sitting here doing this podcast if it were not for doctors and nurses who saved my life and my son's life. Like we just had one of those, one of those experiences that it was really touch and go. And so I have all the gratitude and respect in the world for doctors and nurses and first responders. And, these people are out there saving lives. And the doctors are suffering too with these bans, just to, circle back for a second, because in the states with the most restrictive bans, what's happening is they're not well written. It is not defined. When the rule is you cannot intervene unless the woman's life is at stake, that's not defined. What does that mean? Is her life at stake? And in Idaho, for example, they started parsing that and trying to figure out, well, how many of the women's internal, like major internal organs need to be failing before we can say her life is at stake. This is not, so the doctors are afraid to intervene. They're afraid to do the thing that they went to school for 8 years to do, which is to save lives, right? They're afraid to do their jobs because they could be brought up in charges. They could lose their medical license. They could go to jail. So doctors are leaving these states with the restrictive abortion bans because of course they are. And then in those same states where the doctors are leaving, infant mortality rates are rising and maternal mortality rates are rising. This is like leaving it to the states. This is what happens. This is what you get. It's not pretty. And I can't not talk about that. It's really important for all of us to understand. And you do with that information whatever you will. But the last thing that I want to share with you is there was a post in the last, well, there have been two now, in the last 24 hours it's really hard for me to even say his name. I'm just going to say the former guy, the guy who's like running to be president again, posted a picture of Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton, and he reposted this picture, and someone wrote the most vile, misogynistic, sexist, just disgusting thing, essentially saying that, Kamala Harris got to where she got on her knees. That's essentially what it is. And this beast running to be president again, this reality TV star, reposted that. And for me, it's like, I don't know what people need to see anymore. That is, women have been dealing with that kind of messaging and girls forever, okay? It's like you work hard, you study hard, you do all the things, you graduate, you go to a good school, you work hard again. I so understand this because I've been dealing with this myself, and any woman that you know in your life, if you talk to, has also been dealing with that kind of just disgusting messaging. That is what weak men do when they don't like women, especially accomplished, intelligent, successful, ambitious women. When they feel threatened by that, that's what they do. She got where she got on her knees. It's disgusting. And for someone who's running for the highest office in the land to be reposting that is disgusting. It should just disqualify you right away. If you have that little respect for women and girls, if you hate women and girls that much, you should not be able to run a country where women and girls are making up more than 50% of the population, friends. And the running mate, please. It's like, he could have chosen anyone. This is the person he chose. And no sooner had I sort of processed that first horrible thing that was posted by the former guy, but then this, despicable person, I'm sorry, but this is not it, posted a picture of Caitlin Upton, the Teen USA child who got dragged through just internet bullying because of a way she answered a question at a beauty pageant, that caught her off guard, whatever. This poor kid, she did interviews later and said that she was so depressed, she considered suicide. And this just, I can't even use the word man, running to be vice president, uses this picture and says that he's found the full interview of Kamala Harris. And so now she's dragged back in. She's older now, but she's like still, yeah, she's dragged back in through the mud on the internet. And when he finds out, like, hey, did you realize that she considered suicide because of what she went through when people on the internet bullied her last time? Did you realize that when you decided to repost this clip? He said no. And the interviewer said, do you want to apologize? And he said, no, it was a joke. I'm not going to apologize. This is like not, these people are not it, okay? We have very serious problems in our country and globally. We have things going on that are heartbreaking and devastating, and we need just people who are introspective and calm and certainly respect women to be making decisions. And these people this is not it. It's just, this is not it. You cannot work. If you said to yourself as a ticket, what can we do to make it really clear that we have no respect for women? We are going to demean them and debase them. I mean, you couldn't get it any more right than this. This is it. So that, that's where I'm at. Well, I had a woman come back and defend the former guy and basically say, just kind of like double down and essentially say, you get what you deserve. And, pretty much it was like, what was she wearing? Except coming from a woman. And that's my final thought. That's not a thing that only men say. What was she wearing? It's like, there's so much, I think, internalized misogyny. But for a woman to see a man running for the highest office in the land, degrading and like just reposting something that was so absolutely degrading, demeaning, disgusting, and defend him and not the other, like that is like painful to watch. And identifying with the abuser kind of situation going on. And I just, no one should be okay with that. Like, that's the thing. Nobody should be okay with that on any side, whatever party, whatever you think, like, it's like, that just should be for everyone. We should all be able to agree that's not acceptable. We're not going to be talking about women like that. Period. End of story. We're not doing that. This is 2024, and the answer is no to that. Like, that just shouldn't be hard. But these are some strange times, and I think because I have a daughter in this world, but also I have a son, like, this is just, there's just no way to not like call these things out for what they are, which is just wrong and not okay. There's certain things. So I think part of it is growing up in an environment where you're seeing something and you're like, that's blue. And everybody's saying, no, that's pink. And you're like, no, it's blue. I'm looking at it. I'm seeing it. I'm getting close to it. It does become crazy making. Like, it is important to call things what they are. And some of the things that we're seeing, like what's happening to women in these states with these bans, is not okay. And having a ticket, that's running for office that is being this horrible toward women is not okay. You just got to be able to like call it out. You don't, I don't know. There's got to be some level of like, yes, we can all agree that's not okay. Got to be able to do that. So I hope that you can agree with me on that, at least, and that conversation is really important. Trying to talk to each other is really important, and like build some bridges here and try to like make this world a better place. I understand, again, we're not going to agree on everything, but we've got to get something done here. We've got to like agree on some basic things about compassion in this world and kindness, and like trying to take care of each other to some degree, minding our own bit, like and just come back to something that feels a lot more sane and neighborly than what we've had going on for so long, which I think we're all just like exhausted from. I hope that you are well. I am always open to conversation. I'm easy to find. You can come and find me, like, and talk to me under the essays if you want. You'll meet a lot of great people if you do that. I'm easy to find everywhere. I'm on social media. I'm easy to email. So please, if you do want to talk about anything that I brought up here, I'm open. And I would love to hear from you. And I really am sending you so much love and, wishes for your good health and a better future for all of us. And I'll see you next time.